Hey everybody, welcome to Red Plaid Films and a tutorial that I'm going to show you guys how to do animated matte paintings. And this is my first tutorial, so don't be too judgmental. I'm doing my best. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how I take from my film edit all the way through to the end process, but we're going to focus on this scene here. This scene will become a volcano. If you haven't seen the film that we did for My Super Hot Wife, check it out.
Good afternoon, America. Welcome to WFPP 1080, your source for emergency situational coverage.
Alright guys, welcome back, and so I'm going to take you guys through my process to from Premiere into After Effects. And the programs that I'm going to be using today is Premiere, After Effects, and a little bit of Photoshop. So it would be nice if you guys know a little bit about that. If not, it's no big deal. I'll help you guys out with some of my shortcuts, whatever that I use. So anyways, what I'm going to do here is, so I've got my scene all the way up until this point right here, and this point is where we're going to add our volcano scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this and right click, and with Premiere, as opposed to some of the other programs like DaVinci and Final Cut, the dynamic linking is so convenient, I guess, if you will. So pretty much all you do is you right click and just come over here with replace with After Effects composition. And the reason why I duplicate my footage is because I try not to be destructive. So basically, if I was to come back in here to Premiere and I did everything I wanted to do in here, but I completely screwed it up, well, I can just delete that and I'm back to where I started. So when I drag this over into After Effects, as you can see, my coloring goes away. So this is the After Effects file. It's pink. This is the original after I hide it, and it's blue. So let's go back into After Effects, and as you can see, here's our comp, right? I've cut it at exactly where I want the volcano to start and where it ends, and it gives me the original footage in the original clip that I really want it to be. So to put our volcano in our scene, what I do is I usually, what I did for this one is I drug it to a place that I wanted, and I go to Composition, Save Frame as Photoshop Layers. And for this tutorial, we'll call this Volcano Scene Tutorial. There we go. And I'll open up that window. Let's see, let's go to, it's on my hard drive here, sort through all my endless amounts of stuff here. So Volcano Scene Tutorial PSD. I'm going to drag that into Photoshop, and it's going to pull up my Photoshop layer. So let's subtract here. I'm going to delete these just because we're going to do this from scratch together. And what I did to get my volcano was, if I can pull up my Finder window again, I went through and under graphics I have a few images of just some volcanoes, and a good resource for this is a website called unsplash.com. And as you can see, this is a great resource for, well, this is definitely not the right website, unsplash.com. Let's try that again. Is that going to work? Is my old school internet? I think I'm operating off of dial-up here. This is pretty bad. Unsplash. Ha. Yes. This is a great resource for anybody who is doing any form of effects or whatever. These are royalty-free photos and completely free photos. So all I did was I came in here and I typed in volcano, and as you can see, there are 404 free volcano pictures. Just sorted through here and really kind of got an idea of how I wanted my volcano to look in the scene. And so this was the image that I chose here, and as you can see, I nabbed it right here. So without further ado, I'm going to drag this into my scene, and as you can tell, once it gets in there, it's perfect as is. We're just going to leave it just like that. I'm just kidding. Let's scale this all the way down to just about the right size that we want our volcano to be. I might give it a little bit of rotation here and just pull it right there. See, our tree line kind of comes through here, and there we go. From there, I'll grab my quick select tool, which is over here. Quick select. Shortcut for that is W. But I'll grab everything that is blue by clicking on the blue image here, and anything I don't want, so I'll hold Alt or Option, and I'm operating off of a Mac, by the way, so if you guys get a little confused on a Windows system, I'm not sure exactly what the keyframes are there, but I'm operating on the Mac, and it's pretty easy. So as you can see, there's a plus sign, there's a minus sign. So minus, obviously, I want to keep everything in my volcano there. And I'm just zooming in just a little bit to make sure that I get everything I need. And there we go. Don't care too much for that cloud, all that. And I'll come down here and click the mask section. And we did this backwards. So right click, and you know what? Yeah, I don't know how that happened. So we actually don't want any of this. Somehow I selected the wrong stuff. My bad, guys. And we want this. This is what we want. So I want my mountain. Give me my mountain. Mountain. Alright, and I don't want that. Don't care for that. Yeah. And I don't care for the edges to be perfect. The reason being is because, as you can see from our background, it's a little bit blurry back there. I shot this with the A7S II and the Atomos Ninja Flame, which kind of up converts everything to ProRes. And what that allows me to do is just kind of have a little bit better resolution, but still, at the end of the day, it's not going to be perfect. It's in your background. It's not, it's not perfect. That's just the way it is. So what I did from here is, obviously we got to put this back in the background. So I duplicated, Command J for you Mac users out there, duplicate this photo right here, and I'll go back to my quick select tool, and we'll do this again. But this time I want everything at the bottom, and I don't care for the trees very much as far as the foreground trees, but we can grab a few of them, and I'll just push the mask button here, and what it does is it cuts out all of my foreground layers. As you can tell, obviously we still have a long ways to go. But before I get into doing the coloring for this, I like to kind of color all of my elements together to make the whole scene fit, because we're going to be pulling in a bunch of different elements from a bunch of different sources. So what I did also is, along with this image here, I also grabbed a few different elements, and you can grab different elements from Google or wherever you wanted to grab them from. Just kind of make sure some of them are royalty free, but I'm not really using enough of an image to really get flagged. At least I hope not anyways. Plus I'm not making any money on it. If you were to make money off of this, obviously the end result would be to go in and to purchase these images or whatever, but this is a image that I found off of Google. And what I did for this one is because right now I want to create the lava. Oh, one more thing before we move on from here is, as you can tell, my light source is actually coming from this side. On the day that we shot, that's where the sun was coming from, and our image shows our light source coming from over here. So I'm going to switch that. So with our image selected, I'm going to go to Layer, and where's it at? Sorry, I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and we're going to flip that horizontal. And now our mountain has, you know, the proper lighting, kind of. We'll fix the rest of it later, but this, you know, it's receiving light from the proper source. So what I did from there is I grabbed this image and I just pulled it straight into Photoshop by itself, and zooming out just a little bit. But I want just the lava. That's all I want. I don't care about anything else in the background. So once again, with the quick select tool, I am just gonna grab this lava, and I need to make sure that this is a little bit smaller. So once again, up here in the toolbar, you can get you know, different types of stuff. So here's your plus and minus here, but option helps you out with some of that. So it makes it a little bit faster, and you know, if you're doing matte paintings, it's nice to know a lot of the shortcuts in After Effects. I don't know all of them. I know some of them, and I've just kind of learned them out of necessity. So once I get roughly, so I don't want this because I don't want, you know, some odd coloring from the background. So once I get this, I'm going to push my mask button, and there I have my lava, and it's not perfect obviously, but we're going to do some work with it. So from here I'll just save this as its own little layer, and I'll come back in here and we'll call this lava. I'm labeling everything as, and I can't spell, sorry guys, I'm labeling everything as tut or tutorial so that I don't get myself mixed up from what I did when I actually put this together for the web series. So coming back into here, I'll open up my Finder window, and now we got to find where it is. There it is. So lava tut, right? And I'm going to drag that on there, and as it sits, it does not look very well. So I'm going to, we're gonna transform it. We're gonna do some fun stuff here. I need it to go to the other side. So with our lava selected, let's go back to Edit, let's go to Transform, let's flip horizontal, and let's space this out. So I want it stretched a little bit here, stretched a little bit here. Look at that, it's starting to look a lot better. And now I'm going to create a mask. By clicking the mask button, creates a clear mask, and B gives you a brush. Now, the way the masks work, if you're not familiar with Photoshop at all, the way the masks work is you got a black and a white, and a black is the eraser, the white is pretty much your undo, or it, you know, takes your eraser away. I don't want my brush that size because we're operating with such small elements here. So I'm gonna put this down, you know, to right around 30, 38, and then I'm gonna bring my hardness down to 0 because I want it to blend in. And I'm gonna zoom in here, and my hand tool selected. Let's go back to my brush. You know, H allows you to grab your picture, and not your picture, but your scene, and just kind of move it around without moving your elements. B gets you back to your brush here, and now I'm just going to start brushing this in. I want to get rid of a lot of the hard edges, and you know, by doing that, we're just going to keep brushing and brushing. Now, right now my opacity is set at 49%. I want that at 100, and this just kind of gets rid of a lot of my harsher elements, some of the blacks in there that really just kind of help shape. And right now I can already see I'm not a huge fan of what's going on right there. So let's see if I can fix this just by moving that into place a little bit better. And already you can see that looks a little bit better. let's keep brushing this out. I don't like what's going on there, so maybe decrease my size, increase my hardness just a little bit there, and we'll just keep working at this until it starts to look a little bit more like lava. Now this is going to sit way back in the background, and we're going to cover it up with some smoke, so it's not going to be super, it doesn't have to be super perfect. The idea is you just want people to know that you've got lava here. And what I did for the other one is, so I duplicated this layer again, and Command T brings up your transform option, and I just flipped it, and right away you can kind of see what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to fit this into, if you can look at the mountain and see that it's got a ridge going on right here and some snow falling down this way. I wanted to kind of replicate that with the lava. So as I straighten this out and move this around, I'll do the same thing with my brush. We're going to hit enter, and then I'll bring my brush tools back up, and I need this to fit in just the same way. So I'm going to increase my brush. I don't want any harsh edges here. And I don't want that black in there, so we're just gonna kind of fade that out just a little bit. Come back into here, hit X to switch, if you see my little black and white here. So if white paints on, black paints off, so we're gonna go to white, and I'm just gonna re-add some of these elements back in here. And the idea, once again, like you can spend a lot more time on this and really get this perfect, but the idea here is just to make it seem like there's lava. And what I like to do also is with both of these highlighted, I'll bring down not their opacity but their fill just a little bit. I don't want them to be super bright. If you can tell, what we're working with is an image that obviously has not been color graded. So when I put it into After Effects, we lost our color grade. Now we're back into from After Effects to Photoshop, and it's still a flat image. So when we get to the very end, if we make sure all of our elements are flat but yet still retain a lot of their color data, at the very end when we add our color, it's all going to bring back, and it's going to look a little bit more natural. So with that being said, these are my lava elements, and you can spend a lot more time to make these lava elements even better. But this is the idea behind matte painting, is literally just putting elements together to make it look like the image in which you want. Now, the next thing, let's bring up my Finder window. The next thing that I did was I grabbed from my graphics here. It's important to stay organized, and I am far from that. So from here, volcano clouds. So I just went and looked for an image that had a volcano that was just kind of erupting. And volcanoes do a lot of different things. If you actually, and it's important to do research on what you're painting and what it actually looks like in real life. And this was the best looking image of a volcano kind of erupting out of the top that I can find. Most of them, it just looks like a big ball of smoke coming out. But to our eye, when we see it, when we think of a volcano, we think of something a little bit in between this and just, volcano, just lava going everywhere. So these are different elements. We'll talk about those later. But from here, what I did was, as you can see, it's not a very big image, and I don't need it to be a very big image. But I grabbed this photo off of Google, once again, and drag it into Photoshop, put it into Photoshop all by its lonesome, and I'll grab the quick select tool, and what I want to do is just kind of select everything. Just kidding. I want to select these clouds, this ash, and that's what this is coming out of the volcano, is ash everywhere. Oh no. And so once again, if you've already forgot the tools like me, it is option, goes from selection to deselection, and trust me, I forget these shortcuts frequently. So now that I got that, once again, we'll create our mask. Boom, we pulled this joker out. Now let's save this as Volcanic How do you guys spell volcanic? Volcanic Ash _ tutorial. And then I'm going to put this right in my tutorial folder. Boom, right there. Okay, so from there, let's grab this Volcanic Ash from the tutorial. And I'm going to go back into, let's go back to our original scene before I drag this in. And I'm going to drag this into here, and as you can see, it is nowhere near where we need it to be. I'm going to drag it up. I'm going to kind of fit, if you can see, the little mountaintop that's kind of there. I'm going to fit this right up in here, just like this. Alright? Somewhere in there. And, you know, you can make this as big or as small as you want it. And, you know, in movies sometimes things are larger than life, but so we bring it in here, and now I'm going to, before the mask is selected, it allows me to do Hue and Saturation. If you go ahead and click on the mask selection, your Hue and Saturation option goes away, unfortunately. But I want to desaturate this whole thing. I mean, we'll probably leave a little bit of color in here, but it's just not, you know, fitting into our super gray scene. And as you can tell, this whole background was just, you know, gray. Really didn't give me, you know, a whole lot of options to play with when it came to post. And I could try to do a sky replacement, but goodness gracious, trying to go around all these trees is just not that fun. And I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, as you can tell. So I went, you come in here, create a mask, right? Create a mask, boom, boom. And if I'm going too fast, I'm sorry. You guys are making me so nervous. And right now we have our white selected. So X brings up our black, brings up our eraser, and we'll just start eating away at these really fine edges. And, you know, thanks autosave. And you want to make sure that there's no, you know, super fine edges. This thing needs to really blend in just a little bit better. So I'm just kind of clicking and dragging away, pulling all the harsh edges out of our scene. And, you know, I feel like a little bit like Bob Ross right now. Happy little trees, happy little volcano. And so there we have it. I'm not a real big fan of what's going on there, so we're actually going to take care of that. I'm sorry, that's my dog in the background. We're actually going to take care of that in just a little bit. So right now you kind of get an idea of what is happening here. You've got we've got our ash, you know, coming out of the top of the volcano. We've got our lava, which looks really nice and overly vibrant right now, and we've got our clouds. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back in here, and this is our mountain, and I'm going to double click there just so I can start to name things mountain. And I'm going to, with this, I'm going to actually start playing with my hue and saturation, and I need this to be desaturated. So we're going to pull this down, bring up our brightness just a little bit. I need it to sit in the background just ever so slightly. And also keep in mind that we're dealing with an unsaturated image, so at the end of this whole process, this is all going to get colored back in. So with that kind of put back into the background, you know, when you look at things that are far away, if you can, you know, imagine things that are far away. Let me pull up my Google here. If you can imagine things that are far away, so if you look up, I don't know, far away objects, or far away mountains, let's try that, far away mountains. You kind of get an idea of what mountains do when they're far away. They start to fade out. They don't look, there's not a lot of contrast in there. You start to lose a lot of contrast, and the contrast actually has this blue little tint to it. So that's kind of what we're trying to go with. So our lava here, we want to keep all of our lava together. Any adjustment we do to our lava, we want to make sure that it all stays together. So let's go back to image. Let's go to, I can't do any adjustments. So without being destructive, what I'm going to end up doing here is duplicating this. Let's call this lava. And let's come into here. Let's call this lava also. So this layer, I'm just going to shut it off, and that way, if this is called non-destructive. So if any adjustment that I make from here, I need to convert this to a smart object, and what that does is now I don't have my two layers anymore. This is all on its own, whereas before I had individual layers. So if I ever want to make the jump, and if I ever realize that I just completely messed up and I need to go back, then that's why I have that duplicated. And you'll see that also when we get over into After Effects and how important that is. So once again, go back into Image, Hue and Saturation, and I'm going to pull that saturation out. And there we go. And I don't like what's going on with the black here. So there's another thing you can do. Double click on this and it'll pull up your layer style, right? And see where it says blend if gray. You can start to pull this black out just a little bit more and see how it's just kind of, disappearing. And just play with this ever so slightly till, it gets where you want it to be. And then, it looks just a little bit better, as if it's, kind of sitting in the crevices of that mountain. And so now that that's desaturated, let's go into a few other things. So this kind of fits in our scene a little bit better, and we can do even more adjustments if we need to, if when we get into After Effects. But this just allows us to kind of get to a starting point in Photoshop. What I did also, the next thing that I did, let's move on, is we kind of need to create depth, or kind of tell our audience how big this scene really is. So I downloaded a few cloud elements, and again, just a quick Google search, cloud PNG, just grabbing stuff, and I would come in here, and you want clouds. What they do is they kind of tell your audience how big your object is in the background. It gives a little bit more, I don't know the word for it, but it gives it does the thing that you want it to do. And so what I'm doing is I created another mask, and I'm just gonna mask out the mountain. I want this cloud to be on the other side of the mountain. I'm gonna duplicate this cloud, and I'm going to delete this mask and move this one over to here. And just to give it a little bit of randomness or whatever, we'll play with its size, put it over here, and I'll play with its fill opacity so that it kind of sits in the scene here just a little bit more. And what I want to do is, if you can imagine what it would look like if lava was burning here, I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to turn this cloud into smoke. And how we're going to do that is, again, play with the size. You can flip it. You can do whatever you want to. The lighting, direction just happened to work out for us here, but it doesn't matter when I'm turning this into smoke. So I'm going to pull this fill opacity quite a bit down, and I'm going to come in here, layer adjustments, and I want to play with the levels just a little bit. I want to darken this to give it a little bit more of a darker fill, like there's smoke coming off the mountains. So let's come back in here and bring my fill back up. Bring it up to, let's say, 90. That seems good. Duplicate this one more time and come up here, and Command T brings up my transform option, but it tells me that all of my levels and adjustments that I've done are no longer void or valid, however you say that. And I'm going to bring this back into here. So I lost my smart filter, unfortunately. I'm not sure why it does that. To me, that's a little bit of a quirk. Some things in Photoshop are just weird. Like I kind of wish that Adobe would make their Photoshop and their After Effects shortcuts and tools and everything exactly the same. So I just brought my fill down to 66% here, and the idea is just to kind of, just filling in this, making it look a little bit more like a volcano, you know, would possibly look. And, you know, realistically, everything that we do, I guess, in movies is just a little bit larger than life. If we were to see a volcano in real life, probably wouldn't look exactly like this, but, you know, who cares? So what I did, because I needed a little bit more to do with my sky, is I brought in another cloud element. And this is pretty easy to do. I mean, you can do this in multiple different ways. You can, you know, create your own by going outside when it's a bluebird day and taking a picture and just, you know, keying out the blue and grabbing your white. You can do that. Or, you know, the quickest way to do it, and if you're just doing something on a web series, just grab some images off of Google. Google has a, you know, like a tab that you can click on here. I'll just show you real quick. So if you go into Google and you want an image and you go to, let's see, not safe search, it's tools, and click on usage rights, not filtered by license, or you can put labeled for reuse with modification, and now you can search all of your stuff and everything should be hunky-dory, right? You can use whatever you want to. And just check your usage rights, you know, for things that you want to use. So this is just a simple PNG cloud thing. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to move this. Well, I'm going to size this up. Size it up. I want it to fill my scene, and I'm just going to squeeze it just a little bit because I want this to be almost like a horizon. And I don't want these jagged edges. So a lot of times, like if you pull this over to the side, now this has a good one on this side, but if you come over to this side, you'll see it's got a jagged edge, and it's a little more difficult to paint out. So usually if there's an edge somewhere, I try to keep it on the edge of my scene. And I will drag this all the way up to the top to put it up over everything. And I'm going to create a mask, another mask. B would bring up my painting tools, my brush, and I need to get rid of all these harsh edges. All the way at the bottom of this, there's a lot of harsh edges. Also, keep in mind that it's kind of covering up our scene here, but I don't want it to, you know, I need it to overlap a little bit because we need to get rid of some of these harsh edges. And if you look at, you know, clouds that are kind of going over the top of all the volcanoes you've ever seen in your life, I would imagine that some clouds are going to be in front, you know, not necessarily behind. And again, to navigate between my things is X. And what I did here is I actually duplicated this one more time, and V brings up my tool here. I'll go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal, and put this here. I don't necessarily need this mask. I'm going to create my own mask, so let's create another mask here. Let's get rid of these sharp edges over here at the bottom. Let's get rid of all this at the very front, and that looks good. What I'm going to do from here is I'm going to play with this fill level and bring it down, you know, to somewhere about right in there. I want it to sit. I want these clouds to sit in there and look a little bit more natural. And again, we're going to deal with this in just a second. I'm not a huge fan of that. So this kind of gives us a little bit more activity, I guess, going on with our clouds. Also, it's going to hide the very next thing that we're going to do, and I'll show you in just a minute. So what I want to do is I want to create a new layer, and by that I just click right here, or you can whatever shortcuts you know how to use. I don't know how to use a lot of shortcuts. I'm going to drag this down to, where did my layer go? I'm going to drag this down all the way down. I want it to go behind my mountain. And if you can remember, we have two layers of our image. So you have this that's hiding our mountain, and then we have this at the bottom, and that's kind of our sky. So this right here is going to sit just on top of our image, and we're going to create and darken our sky just a little bit. So with B brings up the brush tool, and what I did was you bring up, you click on the swatch here and it brings up this little color picker, and I want to darken my sky to this shade right here. And keep in mind where your light source is coming from. It's coming from over here. So as I do that, I'll just kind of ever so slightly just kind of paint in, and my brush is way too small. Let's bring this way up. Ooh, that's too big. Let's bring this to, yeah, somewhere in there. That'll work. And I just want to darken this in, you know. I just want it to feel like the world is coming to an end. And as you can see, our little harsh edge is starting to kind of go away a little bit. And, you know, things are starting to look a little bit better. And you can spend as much time with this as you want. And what I typically do is I'll do multiple different layers. So I'll bring up the other swatch by clicking here. I'll try to find a lighter color, and if you can also see naturally in the photo, there's this it almost looks like a little bit of a reddish, or I guess it'd be a greenish tint to the gray. So you can click on that and you can just, you know, bring some of that back into your scene, just to kind of give it a little bit more realism. Your darkness is, oh, that's too much. And one thing that I've noticed is, like, the wider or the bigger your brush is, the more feathering it has to it. So you can, you know, kind of bring it away from your, you know, image to kind of get that feathering and all that stuff. So I'm going to zoom back in here. I'm going to click on this. That's all I want to do for that. And I want some of this color here because I don't like what's going on right there. Let's go back to my brush size. And, you know, like I said, once again, you just kind of play with it and get it to exactly where you want it. So things just start to blend in a little bit better. Let me zoom out. And at the end of the day, like, this thing it's kind of starting its own storm, if you will. I would imagine, like, volcanoes have control over their own weather or atmosphere, and I'm definitely no expert in volcanoes, but it's kind of what I would imagine. If I was to see a volcano, that's what I would expect it to do, is to kind of control the weather a little bit. And if it does or if it doesn't, you can let me know in the comments if I'm just completely way off base. You know, I don't really know what's going on. So I just went in and adjusted the levels of these clouds. They're just a little bit too white for me, and I'm not really digging it. So we're just going to bring them down to a little bit more of a gray. And I need a little bit more paint on this layer. So once again, I'm not a huge fan of what's going on right here, and I need to get rid of that. It's too sharp of an edge. So again, with the B selected, I'm going to bring up my swatches, and I'm going to click right here on the edge of that and just try to grab that color. And I want a little bit smaller brush. And boom, as it slowly disappears. And it may not be perfect. It needs to be just a little bit darker, I believe. And come on. I have faith in you. I have faith that you can go away. Let's do this. Oh, I think I made it worse. Okay. Let's undo that. So the weird thing is, and for all you After Effects users, if you, in Photoshop, if you undo, it's definitely Command Z, but if you want to continue to undo, it's Command Option Z, and maybe I have that wrong, I don't know, that's what's going on with mine. So here is our scene. If you can tell, we did a fairly decent job painting everything in, and it's still a little bit saturated, but I'm not 100% worried about that. We have our clouds in the sky, our ash coming up, all that fun stuff. So let's animate this, and let's have a little bit more fun. I'm going to save this, and we're going to save it as, this is in our tutorial folder, we're going to save it as Volcano Scene _ tutorial. And there we go. We've saved our Photoshop file. Now, we're finally done with Photoshop. Let's have a little bit more fun. Let's actually bring this Joker into our scene here. So, import, which is Command I. Let's go to Tutorial, Volcano Scene Tutorial. and I'm going to bring this in there. We want it editable layer, not edible, you don't want to eat it, but editable layer styles. We wanted a composition, and we don't want to merge it into footage because we won't have as much control over it. So keep it in editable layer styles, and it'll bring this into your composition as its own composition. So you can drag it into your scene, and boom, there we go. There's our volcano. But as you can see, nothing is moving. It's because, well, it's the whole thing, right? I need to get rid of everything that I don't need. And as you can see, some of our layers kind of didn't transfer over, which we'll fix that in just a second. So G brings up our masking options, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to mask out the bottom. As you can tell, when my wife is walking, there is not a scene where she crosses the volcano. And if I was to do that, and I was going to try to do that, but man, just masking her out would have been a nightmare. And so I did, believe me, I tried, and it took way too long because her hair is just kind of blowing and doing all kinds of stuff. So sometimes you just have to give up on your hopes and dreams. I'm just kidding. Don't give up on your hopes and dreams. So I'm just going to mask this out, and it's just going to be a rough garbage matte, and boom. So let's come over here. I'm going to click M and subtract, and now we have our scene. So to make it just a little bit better fit, I'm going to bring my feathering up to just about 40, I believe, and let's see what that's doing. Yeah, see, that looks a little bit better. And because our scene doesn't move very much, it fits in. But here's the catch. One thing that I did notice when I was filming this was my camera moved just a little bit. And I think it was from the wind. As you can see a little bit of the camera movement. I'm trying to point at my screen, but obviously you guys can't see what I'm doing. But anyways, you see the clouds. Not the clouds, but the trees, whatever these things are, they move just a little bit, and that's because the wind was blowing my camera around. So what I did, you shut this layer off, and I need to track this camera, and this is a good practice to get into if you're putting matte paintings into moving elements or whatever. So over here on tracker, we'll go to track motion, and it's pretty simple to do things this way. There's not a lot of movement, but I want to find something that just kind of has a little bit. That's why I drug it over here. It's got a little bit of a little bit more characteristic over here, and I'm going to track the position and the rotation. So when I click on the rotation, it brings up another track point, and if you can see, there is a little thing right here in the back. So we'll just kind of grab that and put it on there, and I need. You know what I did wrong? I needed to bring that to the beginning. Let's just double check and see if everything is where it needs to be. Boom. Okay, nothing moved too much. The next thing is let's go layer, new, null object, and we'll call this, well, we won't do that. We'll call this camera track. Boom. And from here, let's double click on this and it pulls you back up to your layer. So composition obviously doesn't have your layer track information. Layer does. And I'm going to come over here and we're going to edit target. We don't want it to apply to there. We want it to apply to our camera track null that we just created. Click OK and analyze forward. And from there it's going to analyze your scene. Luckily I don't have a whole lot of movement in this scene, but you definitely want to keep an eye on just the little tiny movement that my camera does have. Could be just enough to throw this whole process out of whack, but there's not a whole lot going on. If there was a lot of motion going on, you would probably have a little bit of an issue tracking, and sometimes you'd have to stop and move your track points around. But now that we have our camera track, we want to make sure that we push apply, and we want to apply the X and Y. You can apply either the X only or the Y only, but we want X and Y. We have a little bit of rotation in there, and as you can see, my null is, you know, slightly moving with my camera just a little bit. So I want to parent my Volcano PSD file to the camera track. We'll pull this back out, and as you can see, even with just the slight camera movement, it bounces up and down with my scene. Perfect. Okay, now let's do a little bit more editing to this. I'm going to double click on the composition for the volcano, and as you can see, here's our PSD with all of our PSD files, even the extra lava that I brought in here. It kind of put it in here with us, and that allows me to, you know, it allows me to, if I need to go back and redo something that I screwed up, I can do that. So we need to fix a few things. First thing we need to fix is this lava. Our black and brown didn't kind of transfer over with us. I'm actually going to try to key that out. So this may not be the best thing for it, but let's try a linear color key, and I need to zoom in just a little bit. I guess I can try a linear color key, and now my computer just went nuts. Okay, that's not the one I wanted. Let's undo that. Let's try to key out that color. And let's do our matching tolerance. Somewhere around in there. Matching softness. Sure. I don't really need this to be very, very bright. Like I said, this just needs to be a little bit faint, because once we add our color grade, that color is going to pop. So another thing that I did was my lava stayed the same, but our ash, our volcanic ash, which is somewhere in here, there we go, this joker right here, if you know anything about I guess clouds in the background, is you know, when I guess I don't know how to put this, but the easiest way to kind of animate our matte painting is to just play around with the scaling. And so something is way far back in the background, you're not going to see as much of the subtle movements with it being far off in the background as you would, say, for instance, if it was right up in your face. You'll see every little detail. And one thing you can notice is that this composition for our Photoshop layer is 10 seconds long, whereas the composition for our scene is actually only a little bit over 4 seconds long. I'm going to close all these out so I don't get lost in my own world here. So we have a little bit more time to play with over here, but also keep in mind that anything you do after 4 seconds is probably not going to show up in your scene. So what I like to do is I'll come over here, I'll take the Volcanic Ash, and I like to do something. When I looked at this, I really wanted to try to get some kind of glint or fire almost kind of coming up through the ash a little bit. And how I achieved that was with a little plugin I like to call Optical Flares. And if you don't have Optical Flares, you need to get it. So Command Y brings up our solid settings. I want it black. We're going to label it as flare, make sure it's comp size, and I'm going to put it right there in the background. And now I'm going to go to Effect, Video Copilot, Element. And what that does is it brings up the wrong thing. Delete that. Effect, Video Copilot, Optical Flares. And that brings up our optical flare. Well, it obviously it's sitting in there a little bit weird. So let's put this as screen, and now we can see it here in our scene. So the best thing for the one thing that I actually came up with, I need to find a flare that is a little bit orange, and I really like this vertical limit. It gives me a little bit of it's a real big orange, ball in the middle. I don't necessarily need that much. You could go something with like a golden sun, which actually might be the easiest thing for us to do because it gives us a really nice little ball glow there. And what I do is I just kind of come through here and shut off everything that I don't need. I don't need the white ball in the middle. I just need this going on in the middle. And let's shut off all these other layers. Boom, boom, boom. And now all I have is just this little ball all by itself. And as you can see, it kind of fills up our scene, probably a little bit more than it needs to. Let's play with the brightness. Let's bring it down to about 4. Now keep in mind, we're also playing with a desaturated image. And so you don't necessarily want to get your lens flare looking all perfect and beautiful in an image that is completely desaturated. So make sure that it stays desaturated. I pull up my color palette here, and my lava and my lava coming out of the mountain, which would be represented by my lens flare, are 2 different colors. So let's just try to match that a little bit better. Let me increase the scale so I can see what's going on here. I just need to get my color to match just a little bit more. Let's make it a little bit more red. And there we go. Somewhere in there. And that way it just kind of matches the source. And what I did was, obviously this isn't good enough, right? This is just a flare that sits right there on top of our scene. Well, the best thing for this is you just come into Effect, Distort, Turbulent Displace. And right from the rip, I'm going to solo this layer. You can kind of see that it's already doing something. You can turn up the amount, and it's already pushing my flare around just a little bit. But let's turn up the complexity and see what it does. As you turn it up, you can already start to see it looks like it's set in some clouds. At least it does to me. And let's actually turn our amount down just a little bit, because I don't want it to be so super big that that it gets outside of our scene just a little bit. So with that selected, you can kind of see what we're going for. But if you play with the evolution, you see it kind of comes alive just a little bit. And what I really loved is if you play with the evolution long enough, you can almost feel, and play with some of the other settings, you can almost get it to move upward. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but so we can also animate backwards, and it just kind of has a little bit more of a realistic effect. So let's turn our solo off, and let's move our flare back into the scene just a little bit. And what I also did, and this doesn't work for all the flares, but it works for some of them, is you can push it and just kind of reshape it to your cloud size. And I don't necessarily want all of the haze to make its way outside of the smoke. I want it to stay just within our element. And let's play with the evolution. So I clicked on the stopwatch for the evolution. U brings up all of my keyframes. And I'm going to animate this to where it's moving up. And so we'll move it over just a few until we really like it. I'm going to move it all the way back to here. And what I also want to do is I want to animate the position of my flare. So with that being clicked, I'll click U again, and then I'll bring up my keyframes. I don't necessarily like its starting position. Let's make it animate up. So I'm going to start down here, bring this all the way to the beginning of my animation. Let's slowly bring it up and take this keyframe all the way down to here. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, it's subtle, but what it's doing is creeping up into my cloud. And so if you want it to go up even higher, what we can do is just the same thing. Just kind of grab it, drag it up. And as it drags up, as you can tell, it kind of looks like it's crawling through the clouds. And it's a really cool effect. I was pretty proud of myself when I figured that out. So I'm going to turn those down so I don't have to see them. and we get this, but what I want to do is give it a little bit more realism. So I'll click on Flare and my Volcanic Ash, and I will right click, pre-compose, and we want to move all the attributes. Now immediately when we move all the attributes into our scene, you can see that it does this crazy thing. So come over here and click on what's called Collapse Transformation Tool, and it just kind of continuously rasterizes or renders your image. And so we come back into here, we see this, but what I want to do is I want to animate the scale just a little bit. So I click S, it brings up my scale tab. I will drag this keyframe over here, and I don't want it to grow a lot. So let's just say maybe 4 pixels over the span of 10 seconds, and it's just going to be a subtle growth, you know, almost like the volcano is just coming alive, right? We don't want it to be too overly noticeable that we're animating things. So we come back into our scene, and as you can tell, let me shut this off. As you can tell, everything is starting to look a little bit more realistic. But one thing that I did notice is, even though this is a slow motion scene, if you noticed it from the film, she was walking in slow motion. I shot it in 60 frames per second, but still, I wanted the animation of this lava to really feel like it was shooting out. So from here to here, it does something, but it doesn't do a lot. So the one thing that I came to the realization of is, remember I said that our scene is only 4 seconds long. So pre-compose the flare, move all my attributes, and it'll be flare comp. And I'll come back into here, collapse transformation, brings it back to where it was. And I'll go to layer, time, enable time remapping. Now, our scene ends, let's see, our scene ends right here, you know, right around 10 seconds. Remember, our volcano scene is 10 seconds. This pre-comp is 30 seconds. So I'm going to put a keyframe here, and I know that if I go stay just outside of 4 seconds, my animation is going to remain within the 4 seconds. So now if I go back and look at it, it shoots up a lot higher and gets all the way to the top, creeps its way all the way up to the top, just like I want to see all the way back at the very beginning. And I'm sorry guys, my nose is itching. I don't know why. So if you keep hearing me itch my nose, that's what I'm doing. So yeah, if you can scrub your playhead all the way to the bottom, you see the lens flare makes its way all the way back up to the top. So let's play this and see what it does. Alright, so as you can see, it took a little bit for that to happen. But if we take a look at our scene here, our animation seems to be doing just fine. Growing up through our cloud, it looks real, it looks good. I mean, as real as a lens flare going through some clouds would look. So there's that. Woo, we got that done. One thing that I did notice is this tree line right here starts to look a little bit, it doesn't look real. So what I did to combat that is went back into my comp here, my volcano scene comp, and I did a quick Google search of trees PNG, and let's go back into, let's find where that's at. Go to files, graphics. Oh, I'll put that in here. So trees PNG, and somebody had already done me the favor of cutting out all these trees. Now, what you can also do is you can go and take a picture of a tree skyline and do this whole thing yourself. But this was a quick little video project I did with my wife. I did not want to spend a whole lot of time doing that. So what I did was I drug this right here on the top and just resized it just a little bit, right? And just kind of drag it, click it, and make it fit where you want it to fit. And I just need the tops of these trees. So dragging it over here, let's over here click R to bring up my rotation and kind of rotate it just a little bit to fit in my scene. And I'm not a super huge fan of these edges going on. So one thing that I've learned about After Effects is that there's a lot of the similar tools in After Effects as there are in Photoshop. Click on the eraser tool right here at the very top and double click on your trees, and it brings up the layer, and you can edit the layer individually. And so what I need to do is I need to get rid of everything that is, number one, a sharp edge, and also the bottom. So let's go ahead and start deleting all this and all of this. Now if you need to adjust your brush size, come over here, and once you click on the eraser tool, there's your brushes option. You can bring up your diameter, your angle, your roundness, all this stuff, pin pressure, peer pressure, whatever. It has a lot of really fun settings, and I'm working off of one screen here, so it's a little bit more difficult. Usually when I edit, it's off of 3 screens, so I can have a little bit more access to my tools. But for the sake of the tutorial, we're going to do it off of 1 screen, and I just need the tops of these tools, or tops of these trees. And so when I've done that, if I click on the U button over here, let's go back to my comp, click U. Just kidding. Let's drop this down. Let's drop our effects down. Let's drop our paint down. If you see this, it actually just painted to this point. So anything before that is the whole scene, and then anything after that is what I just painted. I don't want that. Let's come down here and let's highlight the whole thing and drag all of my painting where it needs to be. And so now that I've got these bad boys, let's make them fit into our scene a little bit better. So go to color correction. Let's go to levels. Where's levels? Let's do levels. Right, and I need this to be a little bit lighter. And so I'm just going to drag it up, not that light. Let's come into here. Let's add another color correction, hue and saturation. Let's bring my saturation down quite a bit. As you can tell, these trees in the background don't really have a whole lot of color to them. And that's a sign of the zombie apocalypse, I guess. When the trees are already dying. That's a movie for someone. Or did they already make that movie? Maybe that was The Happening, I think. Something. Anyways, so let's try to make this fit into our scene a little bit. One thing I also noticed is there's not a lot of contrast in the trees in the background, and so I just need to pull that contrast out just ever so slightly. And then one more color correction, curves. And I need to do an S-curve, but pretty much the opposite of an S-curve. Let's pull the contrast and the highlights back down, and now it's starting to fit into our scene a little bit more. Just a little bit more. One thing that I also noticed is if I click away, this looks good and it looks okay, but it is a little bit sharper than everything else. Go to sharpen, blur and sharpen, gauge on blur, increase the blurriness, and it looks a little bit better. It's not perfect, but a little bit better, and it's still just a little bit too saturated. So, and let's pull my lightness back up. So, the more you play with it, the better it will look. But the idea is to take away that rough edge right here in your scene. And once we color it, it'll make these things come to life. So, all right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this. We're going to duplicate this. I'm going to drag this over here just a little bit here. Oh, warning. Warning. Yeah, I don't care what you're trying to tell me, After Effects. I know what I'm doing. Don't tell me how to do my job. I'm just going to grab this and flip it. We're going to rotate it just a little bit so that it fits into our scene a little bit more. Maybe using the arrow keys to kind of push it into place, and now it's kind of sitting on top of our tree right here. So I'm going to come back into here. Let's grab this, and knowing right in here is where a lot of my trees were. Sorry, we're going to undo that. Let's make sure we bring our playhead all the way to the very beginning, so we don't make sure we do the same thing we did earlier and have to drag all those paint lines over. I want to get rid of this tree because I think it's pretty obvious that that tree is there. Let's just do a little bit more painting. And one thing that we can also do is, say for instance, if I want to see what's going on at the same time, I can drag that over here. Boom. Now I've got this and I've got this. And we can, make all of our painting adjustments and everything that we need to do from here. So, there we go. I think that looks good. We could probably spend a little bit more time on it to perfect it, but at least it gets rid of our, our perfect line that was once here. So with that being said, let's drag that back into here. Let's go to our footage. It looks quite a bit better. Come back into our video comp, and as soon as it loads, we can see, boom, we have a little bit more realistic tree line here, and our volcano is just going nuts and is starting to look really good. So another thing that we can do is, just real quick, I know we're kind of running out of time. What I did was I literally just created a bird, and I created this bird out of super simple. I just created a wing, created a body out of using an elliptical, and created another wing. Used the pan behind tool, which is this right here, to drag the anchor all the way down to the bottom and to right here. So you can see the pan behind tool. What it does is it drags your anchor point, and I drug it down into here, and I just started playing with the rotation on the wings. So as you can see my rotation, just keep an eye on my X rotation for both of the wings, and you can see what I did. I just animated them down, and I didn't make them perfect. Like, I don't want them to be perfect because imperfection is I don't know, it's the key to realism in my opinion. And so, like, as you can see, like, none of the wing flaps are perfect, but as I animated them, you can highlight keyframes, you can Command C copies, and then you can come over here and you can paste. And I just spaced them out 7 frames apart and just went all the way to the very end. I've got a 10-second animation here. So what I did from there, after I created my bird, right, let's come back into our comp here. I took this bird and drug it into my scene here, and it is a ginormous bird. All of a sudden we're getting attacked by birds here. So I'll scale it. What I did was I scaled it to about a 2, and V gets rid of my pan behind tool. I started my bird here, and what I wanted to do was play with the position just a little bit. So click on the position, and that's where we want it to start. And then let's click on where we want the bird to end. Now keep in mind, this is a this is pretty much a scaling tool. This tells our audience how big our world is. And so with the bird there, I want it to, birds don't fly in a perfectly straight line, and if they do, I don't think that they're real. So let's bring this over here. What you can do is, if you zoom in just a little bit, H brings up your hand, V brings your other tool up. I can drag this over to here and just kind of play with these handles to get the right flight path for my little bird here. And when I play that back, you know, we'll kind of see a little bit more of what the bird is doing. He's just flying, right? So let's duplicate that, because birds are in twos. And let's drag it forward just a little bit. So click on that, drag it forward. And I want him just a little bit in front of him. Let's not have them start in the same place. Let's have him start in front. Let's, these squares are literally where your keyframes are, your keyframe parameters. So if I want him to kind of dip a little bit later, let's bring him over here. Let's bring this one over here. And just keep playing with the handles and make it look a little bit more like an unorganized flight path as they go along. Right now there's a lot going on. Let's go to half res and try that. So as you can tell, my other bird's kind of catching up. I don't want him to. So there. We have this going on. My little buddies, they're flying. They're making their way back to the nest. Whatever they need to do. We'll preview this and see what it looks like. But they're too big. So let's go back to my scale. I've got them at 1 pixel or 2 pixels. Let's bring them down to 1 pixel. I still think that they're a little sharp. So I'm going to effect. You know what? Sorry. Let's pre-compose this. Boom. Pre-compose. And we're going to call this birds. Okay. And I'm going to go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, Gaussian Blur, and we're just going to give it a slight blur. We're also going to come back into our birds comp, and I'm going to turn on my motion blur for the scene. I just want to see how my birds are flying all by themselves. You can see my 2 little black dots here. See, one of them is, you know, catching up to the other, but our scene starts right here. And so this one is flying a little bit faster than the other one. So let's take a look. Great. Awesome. So it looks a little bit more realistic if you can almost see what's going on. They're not flying perfectly, and that's the key. So let's close this comp out. Here's our pre-comp. We're done with that. Here's this volcano scene. We're done with that. Let's go to here, and we can already see our little birdies. They're looking great. Gives it a little bit more realism to the scene, but I wanted them to cross in front of the volcano, so it's just as easy as clicking and dragging and putting them exactly where you want them to be, and make sure that it comes to the end of your scene there. And there we go. There's our birds. It was just that simple. Okay, save. We always save our project. And the cool thing about, remember how I told you to take it from Premiere into After Effects? Everything that we did right here, right now, all of the things are available now in your After Effects comp. So I just added a little bit, I just added this right here, which is just some lines to kind of give it a 2.43 aspect ratio. And now our scene is in here, but I want it to feel a little bit more handheld. So let's go back into After Effects. Let's pre-compose this while it's still in this comp. Right click, pre-compose, and there we go. I want this to feel a little shaky. To me, it feels a little too smooth. I did shoot it on a tripod, but the shots prior to that were handheld. So the way that I did that was, I did that with a few little expressions. Let's do this. Go to Layer, New Object, and we're going to type in, we're going to go to position, alt, click on the position. We're going to type in wiggle, parentheses, 2, comma, 3, in parentheses, which says 2 times per second. I want this to move 3 pixels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to alt click on the position of the pre-comp and drag it to the position of the null. And boom, bada bing, bada boom, we have our camera shake. Now I know from this expression that I'm never going to go 3 pixels higher than the resolution of my shot, but just to be safe, let's increase the scale to 1. But before I do that, I just want to show you. The reason why we want to increase the scale is because when it does shake, you can see that it's going to leave the frame just a little bit. Like if I was to turn up the value of this to, let's say, 10, right? You can see that now I'm starting to get black lines over here. I don't want that much shake, obviously, but if my picture is going to move 3 pixels every 2 seconds, then I'm going to be 3 pixels of a black edge somewhere on my shot. So I'm going to increase the size here to 105, and that way no matter which direction it moves, it's going to be fine, but it doesn't feel very natural. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate the rotation. So we're going to call this position, and we're going to call this rotation. Okay, let's drag this up to the top. Let's just clicked on source name. There we go. Let's click on the rotation. So R brings up our rotation. Alt, click on the rotation. Type in wiggle, parentheses, and 2, comma, 0.5. I don't need a lot of wiggle. I just need a little bit of the rotation wiggle. So let's come back in here, click on the rotation. R brings up our rotation. Alt click, pick whip to the rotation, and now we should have a little bit of animation on the rotation and the position. I don't like the way this is happening, so let's go to 1, 0.5 and see what this looks like. It feels a little bit more natural, and with these wiggle parameters you can always go through and just, you know, edit however you want them to, you know, to your own specifications. So now that I saved that, remember everything that we did was under this umbrella. Our Comp 9, our After Effects comp that we brought from Adobe Premiere. So now if I am to render this, let's render this. Okay, so now that it is finally rendered out, we can see what it looks like coming from here to here. Really cool. Awesome. Super dope, right? So how I got my final animation was, you can zoom in just a little bit more. So let me drag on my scale, bring it in just a little bit. I put my starting point here because I wanted to show what she had in her hand, but almost like I wanted to do just a little bit of a reveal to the top, but I don't want to go all the way to the top, so maybe right there. And I do that by obviously clicking on the stopwatch to the position, creating my keyframes, dragging them to the end, and there we go. And you know, it just kind of gives me a little bit of a bigger reveal to the end, and boom, there's the end of our sequence. So I'll grab my color grade from the previous clip, Lumetri color, copy, and this is the fastest way that I'll color grade. But I'll drag that in there, but as you can see, obviously it's a little bit overly contrasted. We did some crazy things. So let me come into here, go to basic correction, and I just want to bump my exposure a little bit. Not that much. Let's bump it, you know, like 0.3 or 0.2, you know. And So that's how you get your stuff in there. But as you can see, we're getting a little bit blown out here. This looks a little bit too sharp, and once I put it into Premiere, everything starts to look, you know, a little bit different. So let's actually soften some of this stuff up. Let's go back into After Effects. And here's what's really cool about this is open up your pre-comp, open up your volcano comp, and everything you do on this level, it goes all the way back into Premiere. So it's really nice to be able to, you know, edit from here. So my mountain is really sharp. There's a lot of detail in my mountain. So let's go to blur, compound blur. Let's add a few points of blur here to kind of blend in with my background. I don't want the sharp edges. Let's go to where's my other thing at? This right here. So open up your pre-comp. Don't put the blur on top of that, on top of your pre-comp, because it won't do what you want it to do. Let's just add a few points of blur here. It is way off in the background, so I don't want it to have so much detail. It just seems really, really detailed. And, you know, let's come back into here. Let's go into our flare comp. Let's open that up. Let's add a quick tint to it. Let's go to Effect. Let's go to Hue and Saturation. Let's pull the saturation down out of this quite a bit. And come back over into our volcano scene. You see how it looks a lot different. So let's come to our lava right here, and let's pull the saturation down out of our lava as well. So color correction, hue and saturation, and we're going to pull the saturation down out of there. The contrast is going to bring all that back out. So if we come into our top layer, let's actually pull up our opacity options and bring that down just a little bit. Contrast is going to, you know, make that pop a little bit better, but if we bring that back and come back into our volcano comp, we can see everything looks a little bit more flat, and then come back into Premiere, and boom, everything looks a little bit more normal, and you can play with it. And the cool thing is that the more you play around with the volcano settings, you can go back into After Effects, and everything is super dynamic. So if you just wanted to continue to play around with this and make it look exactly the way you wanted to, which I would suggest doing, you know, spend a little bit of time, you know, perfecting every little element. But that's my workflow in my process, to be able to go from nothing, which is here, to adding a volcano scene and having it animate in your background. And so with that said, I appreciate you guys checking out this tutorial, and I hope you guys learned something. I definitely learned something, and you know, if you want to see me make something else, feel free to leave a comment in the section down below. And until then, happy movie making.